In Mosul, Iraq's second largest city, ISIS struck gold, literally. They robbed that city's central bank, taking a large amount of gold and an estimated $430 million. A smash and grab like that, some experts predict, could make them the richest terror organization in the world. The Council on Foreign Relations reports most of ISIS's financing comes from smuggling, extortion, and other crimes. ISIS is even cashing in on oil, selling crude from oil fields they took control of in northern Syria right back to the Syrian government. The New York Times reports ISIS is also selling electricity from captured power plants back to the government too.
They also do a lot of the traditional terrorist fundraising activities, kidnapping, robbing, thieving, they're involved in the drug trade. They have money laundering schemes.
In the Daily Beast, Josh Rogan reports that ISIS has also been funded for years by wealthy private donors living in countries the U.S. considers allies, countries like Kuwait, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, and that those governments, says Rogan, know it's happening but choose to look away.
The governments could have some plausible deniability and say they weren't funding them directly. At the very least, they were looking the other way.
Now back to the numbers. If you do the math, ISIS may be worth at least $500 million after that last attack on that bank in Mosul. In 2011, the Taliban was said to be worth an estimated $70 million to $400 million. Even Al-Qaeda can't compete. Al-Qaeda had an operating budget of about $30 million a year before the 9/11 attacks. And all of this cash on hand only allows ISIS to attract more extremist fighters who are drawn to higher salaries. Big money also helps ISIS finance large-scale prison raids, liberating hundreds of fighters who then join their ranks.
ISIS is a group that can't be negotiated with. The more resources they have, the more aggressive they'll be, the more violent they're going to be.
Elevating the risk in the Middle East and potentially around the globe. Randy Kay, CNN, New York.
The deputy head of Lebanon's resistance movement Hezbollah blames the United States and its allies for the spread of terrorism in the Middle East. Sheikh Naim Qassam says America and its regional and international partners have brought Takfiri terrorists to the region to fight the Syrian government and then allowed them to gain power in Iraq. Qassam has warned against the growth of terrorist organizations in Iraq, saying that they pose a threat to the whole region and the world. The Hezbollah official also called for action to stop the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, the foreign-backed insurgent group operating in Iraq and in Syria.
It is not in our U.S. interest to go and involve ourselves in the middle of what is a religious civil war. Are there specific security threats to the United States coming from terrorist factions? Yes, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in many other countries in the world. We have to focus our resources that we have, focus our great military on those direct and imminent threats rather than getting distracted by involving ourselves in another civil war that's occurring in another country between religious factions that have been warring for generations.
Congressman, let me just say...
Go ahead.
I just want to say to that, I mean, if the establishment of a caliphate by an organization that makes Al-Qaeda look like a bunch of kitty cats is not in U.S. national interest to stop it, I don't know what is. And the issue of the Civil War, yeah, there are some real tough sectarian issues going on in Syria and Iraq. But this is the same argument that we heard when it came to the surge. Everybody said, well, we can't do the surge in Iraq because this is just a sectarian civil war. And we saw great success with the surge, despite some people's attempt to redefine the surge as a failure. We had the war won.
But Congressman, what do you say to your constituents who are so war-weary? You know, 2/3 of the American public believes it was a mistake to have been in Iraq, that we got nothing out of it. Now we're talking about going back. What do you say to them?
Well, look, the American people have a right to be war-weary. American leadership does not. Leadership is about doing the right thing, even if it's tough. I'm glad that Truman at the end of World War II didn't say, America's too war-weary, we can't leave a residual force in Europe, because Russia would be twice as big as it is today. The point of leadership is leading a war-weary public to the point of saying, this is in national interest, we have to do it. Not standing in front of people and saying, I know you're tired, I know you're tired. It's standing in front of people and saying, I know you're tired, but we have to prevent a caliphate by ISIS from being established.
The United States and Iran are moving into stage 2 of their rapprochement. They are now fighting together to crush al-Qaeda terror in Iraq, Deb Kafal's exclusive military sources report. Iraq is just 2 weeks into a major offensive for cutting al-Qaeda down the first major military challenge the jihadists have faced in the past 6 years. 3 armies are fighting alongside Iraq, the United States, Iran's Al-Quds Brigade's officers, and Syria. Their mission is to foil al-Qaeda's drive for its first independent state in the Middle East across the Iraqi-Syrian frontier. Its Iraqi and Syrian branches, ISIS and the Nusra Front, have declared a holy war to this end under their commanders Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and Abu Muhammad al-Golani. The Anbar province of western Iraq is the scene of the fiercest combat close to Iraq's border with Syria and Jordan. To counter al-Qaeda's superiority in speed and surprise, the U.S. has sent the Iraqi army Hellfire surface-to-air missiles. They are already in use against al-Qaeda camps on the Syrian border. Next, Washington is sending out small, long-endurance, unmanned aerial scan eagles. These drones are the best suited to combat in Anbar's deep wadis and the halophyte thickets lining the Euphrates River.
The Wall Street Journal reports Iran is sending units of its Al-Quds forces into Iraq to help stop the Sunni fighters from ISIS. A senior Iranian official told Reuters Shiites in Iran are so alarmed by the gains of the Sunni insurgents, Tehran may be willing to cooperate with Washington in helping Baghdad fight back.
Meanwhile, of course, a lot of talk about John Kerry's statement to Yahoo News earlier on Monday, where he suggested it could be possible for some sort of cooperation between Iran and the U.S. when it comes to fighting the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria.
We're open to discussions if there's something constructive that can be contributed by Iran, if Iran is prepared to do something that is going to respect the integrity and sovereignty of Iraq and the ability of the government to reform.
Can you see cooperating with Iran militarily?
At this moment, I think we need to go step by step.
Speaking to US TV personality Katie Couric on Yahoo News, John Kerry did not rule out working with Iran. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani also talked about possible cooperation with the US Friday, but as yet, no decisions. Meanwhile, preparations are underway for several options. The U.S. aircraft carrier George H.W. Bush, where it could launch airstrikes using drones, aircraft and missiles. The U.S. amphibious warfare ship, the USS Mesa Verde, with 550 Marines. This sort of ship is often used for evacuations. If the U.S. does launch airstrikes, then the question is, will they confine them to Iraq? The Sunni militants gained so much strength in Syria due to the ongoing civil war, and now it controls a vast swathe of territory from Aleppo in northern Syria to the gates of Baghdad in Iraq.
From what we understand about the situation, is there any way that airstrikes would be enough? Is there any chance at any kind of political reconciliation there right now?
Not at the moment, you don't know who to strike. Airstrikes involve intelligence. Intelligence means you have to trust the people giving you the information. We're talking about an Iraqi government whose own military doesn't trust it. They walked away. They walked away because they didn't feel they had a stake in the future of their country, at least in part. The Kurds don't trust their government. Many Sunnis don't trust their government. How can the United States trust any intelligence that comes out of the government of Nouri Maliki? So airstrikes, boots on the ground, these things are simply not part of the equation right now.
All right, so now we're dealing with really a three-tiered problem. Even to keep it simple, we're focusing on ISIS, okay? ISIS is the militant group. The acronym ISIS is basically Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, okay? Yes. Now, you've told us already they are different because they are not about chaos. They are about land grab and control. Explain.
Yeah. Well, most terrorist groups that we're familiar with in modern times, all they want to do is mayhem. They want to kill a lot of people. They talk about going to paradise. They talk about the perfect Islamic State. But this is a group that is actually seizing territory, holding on to it, appointing governors, appointing local administration. They seem like they want to rule. They want a nation on this earth, not the one in paradise. And that makes them very different. That's a different level of ambition than we've seen from, let's say, Osama bin Laden or people from his group.
And you see it in their plan. We are impressed by the speed. I mean, they're just overtaking the country. There's almost no resistance, but they're being smart. Mosul. Why do they want Mosul? It's the second biggest city, but there's huge cultural cachet to it. There's historical importance. And basically, the metaphor is, if I control this, I control what matters. True?
Mosul is an ancient city. It's a very important business center. It has been for hundreds of years. It is the home of many of Iraq's most famous military commanders. Mosul prides itself as the city that gave Iraq its greatest military commanders. So there's a big political and propaganda message that is being sent when they take Mosul.
And they just rolled through, you know.
They came down this route, sorry to interrupt, but Please. They came down this route faster than the United States and its coalition went up in 2003. That speed is incredible. They travel very light, very fast, and they are traveling, let's not forget, a lot of this is the Sunni part of the country. So they are traveling in territory that, if not friendly, is certainly not hostile towards them and their interests.
Now we believe they're headed toward Baghdad. They're getting very little resistance. Kirkuk is also important because when they took that city, it triggered a second layer of problem now. It's not just that they have to deal with ISIS in Iraq, but now the Kurds, who believe Kirkuk should be theirs. So now you have this tribal movement. They come down. Now they're controlling Kirkuk. So ISIS is gone, but you have a new set of not bad guys, but people who are against the Iraqi government in control. And as they move toward Baghdad, you have the Sunni-Shia dynamic coming into play where the Shia military types, you know, the militias are being asked to come in to defend the city. 3 layers of trouble. Accurate?
Absolutely. Now, with Kirkuk, the Kurds, the Kurdish militia known as the Peshmerga, these are friends of ours. They fought alongside the American military against Saddam Hussein. They are fabled fighters. They're known for their ferocity. The name Peshmerga means people who are willing, who embrace death in a way. So they've now taken Kirkuk. They're not going to very easily give it back to the government in Baghdad. They've wanted Kirkuk for a very, very long time. Kirkuk is an oil city. They're giant. It sits on a giant super lake of oil. So at a strategic importance, economic importance, and for Baghdad to get it back is going to require statesmanship of a level that they don't currently have.
So what happens, what we start to see is this man, al-Baghdadi, I know he has different names, but you know that's one of them, at the center of ISIS. When you look at the precision, the speed, the acquiring of assets in cash because he's emptying the banks, and the momentum he's getting among the people, how do we see this man and what his future is?
Well, he is now possibly the most successful modern terrorist because he holds all that territory. That map we showed earlier, that's a country the size of Jordan. And there are only 3 or 4 pictures of this guy, and that's part of his power, that nobody really knows him. There are no videos of him. There are 1 or 2 audio tapes out there that we think may be his voice.
Better known as his ambition.
Yes.
We know that everything that you see in dark now on your screen, he believes should be under their control of one true Islamic State. And of course it also includes Israel.
And a big chunk of Israel. And nobody can say these guys haven't told us what they want. It's very, very clear what they want. They want all of this territory, and this includes, as you say, Israel, all of Iraq's oil, bordering on some incredibly, you know, an ally here, a rival there.
And you've mentioned to me before we came on, there's word that Revolutionary Guard from Iran are on the ground in Iraq, ostensibly to help the state, but to the Iraqis, that's just more destabilizing because of the history with Iran.
There were reports of that yesterday, and if it's true, it would be, as I was saying earlier, like throwing a grenade into an armory, because Iraq and Iran fought an 8-year bloody war. More than 500,000 Iraqis died. Even Iraqi Shiites, who may share a sect with the Iranians, are not particularly fond of them. And so the idea that Iranian boots are on the ground in Iraq, even if notionally to protect Baghdad, that would be very humiliating to a lot of Iraqis.
And remember this, right now we're hearing from U.S. authorities, no boots on the ground. We're going to do some drone strikes, help with some military. Know this, it doesn't even end in Iraq. Even if the drone strikes were effective, and what's the real chance of that, and there are no boots on the ground, it all emanates from Syria, so you'd have to be involved there as well. It's very complicated, very layered.
Some call him the new bin Laden. He's ruthless, known for ferocious attacks. His mission, to fight for an Islamic fundamentalist takeover of Iraq and Syria. Much about Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is a mystery, but not his viciousness.
Very brutal, very extremist fighter who would execute his rivals.
As the leader of the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, al-Baghdadi is seen as the man behind the capture of Iraq's second-largest city, Mosul, and now a push toward Baghdad. But al-Qaeda leaders recently severed relations with him, saying he was insubordinate, killing too many civilians.
Al-Qaeda thought his infliction of random violence was too extreme even for them.
Yet now, with his recent victories on the ground, he's growing in power.
Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is emerging as a central figure in the jihadist movement, and his organization is growing ever more popular.
A counterterrorism official tells us al-Baghdadi is based primarily in Syria and is just as ruthless as his well-known predecessor, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. But while Zarqawi released menacing statements and videos before being killed by American forces in 2006, al-Baghdadi keeps a lower profile. Some call him the invisible sheikh.
Except among his very, very inner circle, he's rumored to disguise his identity, wear masks, wear turbans, wear face cloths, not let his identity be known.
According to this biography circulating on jihadi websites, he got a PhD in Islamic studies in Baghdad, then formed a local militant group. American forces had him in custody for 4 years in a prison for insurgents, where he may have built ties with other jihadists. He was freed in 2009, and within a year was the leader of Iraq's al-Qaeda affiliate, heading up a renewed campaign of bombings and assassinations. What's Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's future?
If he's able to hold on to territory in northern Iraq for an extended period of time, he may well eclipse Ayman al-Zawahiri in terms of being a leader figure in the global jihadist movement.
But to do that, he's got to survive. All 3 of his immediate predecessors as the top jihadist leaders in Iraq were killed. And right now, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's got a U.S. bounty on his head of $10 million.
The south will be south for the Shia. The Sunnis already have their area, and the Kurds have their place, the provinces, which is Kirkuk, Dohuk, Sulaymaniyah, plus Kirkuk and Erbil. So what we see, it's hard to believe that 1,500 fighters with light arm took over the whole province. It's described as the 3rd largest city in Iraq, Mosul, Nainawa, the province of Nainawa, where there were government forces estimated by 4 military brigades, and that's about 50,000 army personnel who equipped with heavily armed equipment, including air power, tanks, and large logistic abilities to to protect the province of Mosul. But they failed. What they did, they left their equipment, which is purchased with lots of money for the fighters, and at the border of Mosul and Kirkuk, the Peshmerga, the Kurdish forces, took those equipments, the government equipments, as a gift, actually. And who are those, the ISIS? I think, as it's believed by an average Iraqi, they are part of the Al-Qaeda, so-called Al-Qaeda previously, were created by the CIA and partially and with the Saudis partially in the 70s to fight the USSR when the USSR occupied Afghanistan in the 70s. So part of them, the Al-Qaeda, then the other major part is the generals from the previous army, the Saddam Hussein army, who are well trained and expert in army matters. So beside them, the Sunnis who lived in the western provinces, who felt that they were taken advantage of and not being treated by the Shia government in Baghdad. And with them, of course, some extremists, Islamic extremists from Chechnya, maybe, Afghanistan, North Africa, and some other Arab countries, like Saudis, for example.
The significance of a representative of Iraq's most senior Shiite cleric, Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani, calling on Iraqis to take up arms against who he's calling the terrorists. The idea that Iran sending in al-Quds forces, Iran would work with Washington, D.C. to shore up al-Maliki. You are Shia, like the regime in Baghdad. What do you think needs to happen right now? Do you see Iraq falling apart? Do you see Baghdad being taken, falling?
Definitely, Amy. I mean, to destroy a country is not enough to bomb it from the air, but to have an inner fight. And that's what's going on since 2003. The inner fights that based on dividing Iraqis to sects and ethnic groups like Sunni, Shia, Arab, Kurds, religiously Christian and Muslims. That's what's going on after the invasion. And after Iraq was one piece, now we see it falling apart, unfortunately. And Iraq is the first country who entered the so-called, if you remember, Condoleezza Rice called the constructive chaos. So Iraq started it in 2003, then the Arab countries followed suit in Libya, Egypt, Tunisia today, and Syria, as we see. So so-called the Arab Spring is not really Arab Spring, because this spring never has borne fruits for the countries that are affected by it. But what's going on is controlled by the huge embassy in Baghdad, run by at least 5,000 employees. They have nothing to do except monitoring Iraq, advising the Iraqi government what to do, and also monitoring the area surrounded by Iraq. The 5,000, this is besides the unestimated about 10,000 military forces who are stationed there to protect the interest of the embassy and the U.S. So I think they should leave the area, not to intervene in the war in Afghanistan, and pull out their forces and let the Arabs and the countries of the area solve their problem. But it's not going to be easy. It's going to take some time, but eventually they will figure out a way to get... but remember, there was a security agreement between Iraq and the U.S. In 2011.
How many people from this country are fighting for ISIS, and what risk do they pose to the UK?
Well, the estimates that have been given so far is that around 400 people from the UK have taken part in fighting with ISIS, but those numbers are much more based around what is happening in Syria rather than what is happening in Iraq, where we have considerably less information. What I can say to the Honourable Lady is, together with the Home Secretary and others, I've chaired a series of meetings in Whitehall to make sure that our intelligence, security and policing services are focused as sharply as they can onto this problem. The estimates are now that this is a greater threat to the UK than the return of foreign jihadis or fighters from the Afghanistan or Pakistan region, and we need to make sure we're doing everything we can, as I said, to keep our country safe.